and I can pick the ones where we have the highest confidence that those are going to produce return on investment, which is basically highest return over smallest cost. And that is exactly also how you think on the investing world. Ben, how are you doing, man?
Doing well, thanks, AG. Good to meet with you here.
Yeah.
So let's talk about experimentation. I know you're really close to the VC world more and more and more. I, on the other hand, have been really focused on experimentation programs. This talk here, we're kind of bringing them together, right?
Yep, absolutely. And I hope we'll, explain to people how the VC approach and the experimentation approach are very similar, and there's stuff to learn from either side.
Yeah. So one of the things that's pretty controversial in the experimentation world is estimating kind of ROI for experimentation. Estimates for future revenue, for example. This is a big topic of yours, and it's a big focus of investing. Asymmetric risk rewards, and for investing, which way more than I do. On the experimentation side, estimating, projecting out ROI from the result of an experiment is extremely controversial. So
absolutely,
on the VC side, where do you come in on this? I think this is, I'm starting out with a difference between the two areas.
Yeah. No, you're right. And I think the way you're going with this, which I like, is like you're questioning whether it's worth it, or have I found a hidden gem that I haven't publicized on estimating, or am I completely wrong on my appetite to estimate, returns on experiments? Absolutely fair question. I love how you're starting here. If we take a step back here, I'll explain two different things. The why I am thinking of estimating revenue outcomes in experiments and how it relates to VCs. Let's start with the VC side. So I think everyone knows basically how VC works, especially at the early stage. You invest broadly on a number of startups and companies, and most will not succeed. At least they will not succeed in ways that they return a lot of money. And a small percentage, a couple of percent, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if you're really good, you're Sequoia, right? Return 100x, and they pay back more than what you've invested, and that's how you make money. Okay, that's pretty clear. Do you know what's the let's say the what do we call the IRR? Like, you can think of the return on money of VCs. Like, if you give a VC like $100,000, how much are they going to return per year? Guesstimate.
Is it a 110% return?
So they return the best VCs return about like a 15% lift per year, like 15 to 20% lift per year. So yes,
Yeah,
let's say 150 to 100. Yeah. Yep. So it's not that much.
Yeah. So safety.
It's not that much.
Safety in numbers. Let's spray and pray.
Yep. And there are huge wins. You invest in Facebook, you invest in like LinkedIn, like huge wins. Okay, so it means that the rate of failure is like dramatic.
Yep.
Okay. Take that mindset, go to experimentation. Most experiments are inconclusive. All right, either because we don't have like statistical significance, very common. That's a problem with like forecasting. We should have known that we were not going to have the volume before going there, but still, often more than not, it's unconclusive. A lot offer no variance. All right, it's conclusive that nothing has changed. That's very common, right? And if you just offer like some very small wins, a very small percentage actually produce dramatic impact, especially for later stage companies. Like, how often do you go into a company and like you work with them and boom, you 3x the conversion rate? Like almost never, right? Yeah, almost never, right? So there is so that, I think, is the similarity, right? It's very rare that you have something that produces a dramatic impact, number one. Number two is going back to the desire of forecasting. My desire is to have a rigorous approach, just like VCs have. VCs, actually, it's very competitive. It's very hard to like produce this 115, 120%. Most VCs do not return more than the market, which is interesting, than the public market, okay? Or return less than what you've invested.
Yep.
It's super competitive. The best VCs are very rigorous, and they do a lot of research and due diligence before they invest, okay? And in that, they try to estimate, what are the likelihoods that this thing outcomes, what's going to be the possible outcomes, whatnot. I am trying to apply the same approach to experimentation. Not so much, this is exactly going to do this, and I have like this outcome for this experiment. That's not what I'm doing. I'm trying to be rigorous and say, in aggregate, if I do 20 experiments for a product that I know well, for a company that I know well, our average win is going to be 1 out of 10, maybe 2 out of 20, right? And we're going to produce that much lift. And so I have an estimate of whether it's worth it to do experiments at scale and to invest time in experimentation, whether it's not. So my desire of estimation, of forecasting, is to be reliable as an experimentation team, and it's return on investment of the team more than this specific experiment.
Yeah, I think the analogy or the commonalities break down at the experiment level, but what you've talked about is at the portfolio level, let's say, from the VC side of things. With regards to an experimentation program, there's safety in numbers. You have to align it properly. You have to point it to the right volume of data to be able to measure. Can we even measure, et cetera, that kind of thing. So, on that point there, so how does a VC, highlight or align towards where it's worth to take the risk? Like, where should we place our bets?
Absolutely.
So the experimentation point of view, there's 3 different types or flavors of experimentation. There's sort of iterative optimization. This is a focus on margins. When you do have crazy volumes, small changes can accumulate and you can, stack margins on top of each other. I think this is not quite what the VC world is talking about. And then on the other, and in the middle, you've got some substantial types of experimentation having net new functionality. You're moving over to React framework. This is substantial. This is, you don't know what's going to happen, but it's a different framework. And then there's like disruptive experimentation. And that's what I think is more right to geek out on with this conversation, right? Where to place the risk, how to do that, how to lower the cost of doing that. What do you think on that?
I like how you silo those things. It's very accurate. And actually, if you think of VCs, they place bets on each of those silos. All right. Think of like e-commerce D2C. E-commerce D2C is very low margins, very high volumes, and that's iterative. Like we all know, like, people are selling some like new soap bars or like food bars for people that are in specific segment, and they margin at 10-15%, and at scale it works. And there's still a lot of risk. So all of those segments exist. I think you go back to the rigorous approach and you apply that to experimentation, which I've done a lot. It's about trying to understand if this works, and if it works well, what's the outcome? So I have this best case scenario, okay, which is the max outcome of this experiment. And what is going to be the cost of this experiment, right? In terms of human cost, so time, engineers, and maybe tools or spend if there is spend, right? And we try to then forecast the return on investment, right? And that's how we pick experiments. Again, I'm not trying to be accurate at the experiment level, but I'm saying is that out of a list of 50 potential projects, if I can have this best case scenario and this like good estimate of cost, I can sort them and I can pick the ones where we have the highest confidence that those are going to produce return on investment, which is basically highest return over smallest cost. And that is exactly also how you think on the investing world, is like, am I getting a good price, and or is this overvalued, right? Overvalued. And if this startup goes big, how big will big be? Okay. And that's very often, especially if you start reading into like the mindset approach of the Sequoias and the benchmarks and a couple of others, like they always think like market. How big is the market? Like what's the TAM? And I myself am a scout for Sequoia, and when we do some investing, my partner on the Sequoia side often says like, is the market at least $1 billion? And often I'm like, I fail to see how this is going to be $1 billion market. And and they say, well, forget it, right? And it's interesting. I don't always agree, but it's interesting mindset, right? And when you think about experiments, that mindset pushes you to push back on huge engineering projects and try to cut them down into MVPs. And my approach has often been, okay, when I see an experiment, I see a project, I look at all of the unknowns, all the hypotheses. We say, oh, okay, well, we're going to do like launch this. Let's take an example. A product made for acquisition that creates some form of value. Let's take something that I did in the past. For example, at Drift, we launched this Drift response time bot, which basically would scrape all of the contact forms of all of our target customers, place a fake demo request, calculate the time for the sales team to respond, inject that into an email. It worked really well. Took us like 2 weeks. What are the unknowns there? Are we able to scrape? Are we able to place demo requests? Are people responding to those fake demo requests? At what rate? And does all this thing create, a lift in the people we're going to reach out to versus the control, which is like sending cold email? And so we try to break down all of those unknowns into separate MVPs to reduce the risk of the project. Okay, and the usual approach when you want to do that often is do with humans all the steps you're wanting to automate and test the customer's appetite to your message, which means in our case, we'll have people just like place demo requests, monkey typing, and send the emails and see, does that lift the response rate from people? And if it does, then we can calculate, is it worth it to automate or is it not worth it? Is it worth the investment? And then we can see what's the total market of people we could automate, what's our TAM, and so what is the total value? So we start getting closer and closer to the real known outcome, even before we do too much work.
Yeah. So how can, these marketers that are running these experiments, the whole idea there is lowering the cost of measurement. So if you have a day rate for your experimentation program, for example, 2 weeks day rate, what's the $1 billion market version with the gain that's able within this area if you're going to improve it, right? There's classic tools for this in the experimentation world, prioritization tools, power analysis of your website. What's harder to deal with is marketers that are sort of all over the place, not measuring this, right? Not thinking revenue focused. They're just thinking like number of MQLs or something like that. So how do you take a team of marketers to be able to identify, like, do you have any tricks or pitfalls with regards to, getting those marketers to assess risk like that, or to be able to even create a revenue model based on those, we've done a lot of analogous optimization for, like Drift, your example on the B2B world. If you're optimizing a lead scoring algorithm, for example, like you're passing over leads, MQLs over the fence to sales, you're passing them over with a certain amount of metadata. Can we improve that to affect the win rates on that for that sales team? And then how do you then calculate out like what that might mean? Marketers aren't doing that, right? They're not connecting the dots there.
That's a mistake. They should.
Yeah. So
and that's because they don't own it's often a company culture and org setup issue more than a personal issue. Yep. Right? And often when I come in, and these days I do advisory, I talk to the CEOs and I tell them your marketing team should own pipeline. Yep. If not, at least pipeline. Like you should not see in the reporting MQLs or SQLs. Those still exist, and that's okay because that's actually what people like. They're signing up. They're being like, convert. That's fine. But the reporting, the goals should be pipeline. It should be dollars. And there's one controversial thing that I like to push, which is salespeople don't create revenue. They only convert part of the revenue that's passed down to them from marketing. And if you take that mindset, then marketing and sales can, they have a common surface area around pipeline. And if you have a lead scoring model, you can have what we call like a weighted pipeline, which is pipeline adjusted by like likelihood to close and whatnot. And you can start saying, hey, salespeople, last month we passed down $1 million worth of weighted pipeline in revenue. How much of that did actually close? And then you can break it down by channel, by campaign, by sources to know what is overperforming or what is underperforming. And that's a much better discussion than if you have like MQLs and SQLs. So, and one of the key successes I've had at Gorgias, one of the last companies where I was really involved with, is we created small squads of channel marketers and salespeople who would meet weekly to discuss of the conversion of the pipeline into actual close won sales, and they would co-own the revenue number. And that helped a lot on the discussion side.
Let's talk about the incentivization, like in a setup like that with the squads, right? So what you've just talked about is like KPIs, MQL, you've got MQLs and things like that, and then the goal metrics like revenue. But the way that I look at it is, these MQLs can be lead metrics and revenues lag metrics, right? So what you're proposing though is, I don't know if it's so controversial, but let's focus on the lag. But at what interval? Like, KPI, if that's the speedometer, we still need to be looking at that, right? Like, how do you get rid of that? Do you get rid of MQLs? Like,
I get rid of it. In the best case scenario, the most advanced companies on the data side get rid of it completely. Okay, it exists in the database because that's how the aggregate number is being calculated, but the marketers no longer look at it. Again, take the example of Gorgias. The marketing team does not know how many people sign up. They don't know how many people did have any step, and they don't care. The only thing they have in the dashboard is forecasted revenue at different stages of the funnel and per channel. That's all they have. And the underlying lead scoring engine calculates how much a lead, MQL, SQL is worth based on their company size and engagement.
When you have an experimentation team, you need a lot more metrics to be able to kick out. You need those MQLs are the ingredients for the measurement system, right? You can
and they exist.
Revenue, but the ingredients are going to be MQLs, SQLs. MQL to SQL ratio is a great one.
The benefit of having an aggregate number in dollars with the underlying lead scoring converting all to revenue is that it avoids a lot of pitfalls in experimentation, which tend to create a lot of low quality MQLs, which you only discover later. That happens so often because I'm a marketer, man. I know how to cheat. If you give me a goal of MQLs and you give me a bonus, I'm going to crush that goal, right?
I'm going to selfishly push you on this topic of the perverse incentive thing. So there's experimentation programs, IBM, Convoy, Chad Sanderson, tying experimentation results specifically to bonuses. I was off a meeting yesterday with Lucas Vermeer and saying how horrible this is, how much he fought this at Booking. Incentivization here, if you're only looking at pipeline, how are you tying your bonuses to that? If you're running an experimentation program, I'm looking at it from that angle, right? There are programs out there that are doing well with velocity of tests when they incentivize through this route, right? Through it, let's tie the results of the experiment to your bonus or to the marketing resourcing, which is the same thing, right? Same idea. So what is your opinion on this then? And how do you disentangle or still incentivize volume, quality?
I generally try to split the bonus half and half between a volume of experiments and pipeline growth. Pipeline for me is important. I want people to be looking at pipeline. So probably caveat, I only work in B2B, mostly, let's say B2B SaaS, B2B FinTech. I don't work in consumer. So there's an important caveat.
Yep.
One of the reasons for the caveat is that there's a long window of time between which the SQLs don't convert, right? And so having those forecasts help us, like, let's say, close that time window. And that also means that we don't know results of experiments for many weeks, most of the time. So I want to incentivize for experimentation velocity and risk taking. I want people to take risks. I want most experiments to fail. Otherwise, I believe we're not taking enough risks and we're not going to find the big outliers. I also want people on my team to be incentivized and looking at the bottom line and looking and talking to the sales team. And if we are not incentivized for a common metric with sales, we tend to stop talking to them and push the problems to them and say it's not our issue. And that is not something I can afford.
So I'm going to push you again on that. So it's like your structure of incentivization there, like bonuses based on what? Like half volumes of tests, half pipeline? Is that what
Yes,
you're?
correct. Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, okay, cool. So I'll have to play with that a little bit, but I want to circle back. You know, if you want to incentivize risk, you mentioned change management from the top, organization, cultural kind of things. If KPI is the wrong metric, when we need to throw this out, we need to focus on risk taking, the ability for product owners to not only take risks, but own or have autonomy in decision making around their product, around what they're doing. That needs to come from the top, and that's been my experience. Is that it's not there. Like
Agreed.
Like,
and it can't be there. That's why I like having a separate team that's in charge of experimentation. Whether you call that growth or like whatnot, it doesn't matter. For me, you can't expect product teams and marketing, in the sense of traditional marketing teams, to be risk prone, because when things fail, they get the stick, and naturally they become risk averse. Just think about it that way. If a product leader takes risks and fails 3 product launches in a row, that person's out. Like, no question, that person's out, right? But like, how do you think your team is going to see that and say, hey, let's take risk on the 4th one? Like, hell no, it's not going to happen, right? And so you need to have a separate team which is risk prone, where failing is part of the mindset of the team. Okay, the angel investment side of your team. That's what it is. There's little information, there's little data, and you're going for velocity more than you're going for certainty. So product and marketing are more on the certainty side of your investments. All right, you're doing the things that you know there are sure wins. And often when I go and I do audits and I talk to companies, I'm looking first as, are we covering the basics? Because if not, we don't need a growth team. Like, the people say, oh, I want like high velocity experimentation, and I see like they're not doing SEO well, they're not doing paid well, and like they don't have basic CRO. Like, guys, like, it's not experimentation you need. It's like, you need a team to cover those basics, all right? And like, come back to me in 6 months, and maybe there's something we can do. All right, but for now, nah, it's not experimentation.
Different pedal to push. On the experimentation, to get into some of the tactical side of thing, I've been posting a lot on experimentation result tagging and what the languages that we're using. You mentioned being risk prone. You see classic tags of win, loss, things like this. Flat. You mentioned that most experiments are flat. We've recently, across our programs, added error, like mistake. So there's something in the production that's a mistake. There's something in the theory that was, incorrect assumptions, along those lines. And then starting to track it, because we're wanting to require a 5 to 10% error rate. Because if you're not seeing errors, if you're not seeing mistakes, one of 2 things is happening. One, your team is afraid to report mistakes.
Yeah.
Right? Not error prone. They're not okay with that failure. Or 2, you're not pushing complexity. You're not pushing upon those bigger bets.
We then have ways to look at per team, per person, per channel, so that our system of experimentation learns from those outcomes. And the next sprint, a month, when Ben comes to me and says, "Oh, I've got this great idea, I'm going to ship it in 2 days," I'm like, "Ben, over the past 10 experiments, like you've been off by a number of days on your estimate. Like maybe we should adjust that."
Oh, yeah.
So tracking that, both on the outcome and on the cost, is really helpful for us to improve our forecasting and our ability to ship things fast.
I think your template there is great, and I'd love to dig into that a little bit more. The thing that caught my eye is the projection and the revenue. That right there gets engagement in that template and that artifact that you've got. So I want to circle back to this change management, the cultural side of things. We're trying to get our marketers closer to revenue. The experimentation, like why do we experiment? Revenue, right? As a surrogate for customer value, but if you use a system like that, what you just showed on Airtable, are you getting engagement in it? Having dollar signs that'll get you some engagement in there. People will see it. But how are you democratizing that? How are you getting a bunch of people, and it's not just you in there doing that? How are you getting it
Absolutely
top down, getting people less afraid to fail?
Yeah. So how do we get people to use the system? Because systems like that often fail. I think there's a couple of ways. One is there's a form, and anyone in the company can input projects. Anyone, right? And we get anyone to, like, a lot of people to like input ideas. The growth team and the growth PM clean it up, find duplicates, remove those, and basically like make sure that they're in a state where we could discuss them, and we try to discuss and prioritize them and sort them out cleanly. That's one thing. It's the input. Second thing is, how do we use it on a week by week? Well, when you go through, depending on your cycle, weekly by weekly, we use this Airtable to pick projects and to report the outcomes. We don't use this to do the actual production. That can be in Asana, Linear, whatever your like engineering production is. But we use the system to pick new projects and once a month report outcomes. And so each project owner is supposed to add all of the actuals once the project is analyzed. Okay. The last thing is reporting. And that's probably what is the biggest difference. As a leader, I've been in a situation where I was reporting MQLs and SQLs, and I was seeing good growth, and my CEO was frustrated because it wasn't converting into sales, and I felt that I was disconnected from the rest of the business. It didn't feel good. Here, you can actually see on any given like sprint or month or quarter, the sum of the forecast, which is adjusted for failure rate. And so I can start committing to my CEO and says, "Hey, Ben, next month, we're going to ship for 300K worth of like experimentation wins." And Ben's going to push back and say, "Gee, like, how confident are you in that?" So, well, based on the past like 6 months, like, we're likely to hit between 90% and 110% of that because we've got, 12 experiments, and that's where we've landed. And so you start being able to have a pipeline of experiments that you can convert into some kind of outcome over a time period that you can commit to. You are more reliable. You become a function that your CEO can rely on, and he or she understands, like a sales team. You put more salespeople behind more leads, you get more sales. Okay, put more people in the experimentation team shipping more experiments, you get more pipeline. That's what you want. You want to build that trust, and that's how the system gets used. It's basically, you have this bottom-up calculation of all the experiments becoming a total number, which I, as the leader, my job is to merge that with the top-down model of my CEO giving me like an annual or quarterly like growth goal and headcount, and I split it into like channels. And when in an ideal world, I'm able to match both and say, okay, I've got a $2 million growth goal, and I have $2 million worth of experiments in pipeline, and I have the headcount to spread the experiments across the months. And then I have a system. That's the ideal situation.
Yeah, you've painted this like gorgeous like picture of a great system, and I'm a big modeler guy. Like I do a lot of like research science, and I've done a lot of modeling in the past. And my history with models tells me that they can be, this beautiful framework, this beautiful representation of the real world, can really break down if you've got shitty inputs. So like you mentioned that right in the beginning, the way that someone is inputting a new project and is setting the estimates of potential, revenue and things like that. Anyway, I'm venting a little bit when I'll say that, like, the companies that we work with have these siloed teams, different ways of measuring things, different systems of attribution, and it can get wild. Like, how do you? I mean, yeah, just venting.
But the point here, but the point here is this. I hope answers the initial question we had, which is change management and culture.
Yeah.
This system helps me make the founders, the CEOs, comfortable with the risk taking, because I can show them the aggregates and they say, gee, is this going to work? I says, I have no idea if this experiment is going to work. I'm no longer committing to any specific success. I am committing to the overall lift. That's my aggregate commit. And that's what matters. You as a CEO should not be concerned about any given experiment. It also helps me with one big other thing, which is I'm sure every marketer has had their founder, their CEO come to them and says, Ben, you got to ship this thing. Oh, I've seen this crazy G guy. He does this thing with chat. Please do that. And Ben's like, oh, come on, another G idea. Right? Hates it. But can't say no. With this system, you can actually push the CEO to input it and see if it comes at the top of the stack or the bottom. And if it's at the bottom, say, well, I have to push back. This just doesn't look like the best thing we should be working on.
Yeah, revenue driven prioritization. Yeah. I love it. I still think about those inputs and the different silos and the way that people are attributing and calculating that.
And that's, nothing's perfect, but in my I'm now running this Airtable at I think almost 10 companies. There's like Drift, there's Gorgias, there's Ramp, there's CapChase, Hippo Video, Acquire. There's like a bunch of them are running it, right? That I've worked with, and the biggest pitfall is lack of execution. That's it. It's people who input stuff and actually don't ship the experiments. That's the number one cause of failure. If they actually do things and they have good velocity, good stuff will come out.
Yep. Yeah. From the program standpoint, the point of this event and this talk is about getting closer to revenue with experimentation. It's funny when you run experimentation programs, there's different reasons to run them. There's different, like, people come to them and start experimentation programs for different reasons. I think for you in B2B SaaS world, revenue is a big focus. That's the focus of this event. The two other buckets I would say are experiment, focusing on process, focusing on, like, let's democratize decision making, let's push decision making down to product owners. So it's like an operating system focus, right? So let's get G's Airtable, let's set this up, and let's make decision making go from the C-suite down into product owners.
Yes.
Right? That's the why they experiment. There's a lot of experimentation programs that go from 0 to 1 with that kind of focus. Safety in numbers. Let's just run the machine, and then good results will come out of it. The other one is the third bucket, I would say. So revenue is one bucket, the big one that we're talking about. Process, operating system, second bucket. The third bucket is focused on the customer. So more from like the psychologist hat standpoint. Customer learnings, get close to the customer. You see a lot of like customer experience optimization, or the customer experience UX, a lot of roles there. So they're using lead metrics of customer learnings, lead metrics of customer perceptions, NPS maybe, or other types of metrics like that, instead of your revenue metrics, right? Instead of your revenue focused driver metrics. When you're running a program like that, how's your Airtable template? Do you have room for that type of customer focused experimentation, or are you purely focused on revenue? I see you shaking your head.
I know the answer is no. It's the same for like no, for one reason, and also I got another example why we don't do it. No, because often it doesn't apply to the type of companies I work with. There's just not enough volume for this to be stat sig. Also, like the way that most customer-focused, let's say, surveys and data collection is done does not give me confidence that the data is legit because there's just too much bias in how we collect the data. Basically, for the audience, we tend to collect data from people who are engaged. By definition, the people who are not engaged are not going to respond, and thus that creates a huge bias that we optimize for the people we already have. And it's extremely hard for B2B SaaS products to correct for that because you got to create incentives, but then that creates another bias and whatnot. And the other thing that we don't handle on the Airtable is retention and churn. Not that it's not important, but the time to learn from retention and churn is just so long. It's such a lagging metric that you can't build the velocity. Like if you just think that you have like a churn at median churn is at 12 months, 15 months. Well, you're going to start seeing the results, probably anywhere between like 9 months and 2 years. And then you say, oh, this was successful. But how many experiments can you run? Like maybe 2 per year, 3 per year? Like, doesn't work. Right? So it's super hard.
Related to your first point, with regards to low numbers, right? Low volumes. So like with e-commerce, for example, or even, some like Code Academy, for example, we would cohort and look at churn and look at engagement down funnel within experimentation cohorts. So it's doable, but you need the volumes.
Yeah, which just often just isn't there.
Yeah. Well, cool. Yeah, on my side, I'll take my moderator hat off for a second there. Those are my list of questions for you, G. I don't know if you have any for me related to experimentation programs, specifically what I geek out on.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from you, especially because like I'm more and more on the advisory side and hear what what's new on the experimentation side, especially, and I think that's one of the challenge for the audience is a lot of things that we hear comes from like teams with very large numbers. Going just back to that, like we hear from the Airbnb experimentation team and like the Tinder experimentation team, they've got great stories. But like, I know the folks there, and like, sure, they get like stat sig in like 3 to 4 minutes, and so yeah, the rest of the world isn't there, and so like, probably what are you seeing that's applicable to medium-sized startups with a couple of hundreds, a couple of thousands of customers or prospects?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm biased because of what we just covered in this talk, but my mind quickly goes to the topic of like demand generation versus lead generation, and the way that you approach like experimentation funnels and just data piping with regards to that. So like the idea of like dropping the MQL focus, thinking about the data that we have available, like let's stop thinking so much about attribution and start asking, visitors questions as they go through the funnel. So the big focus in a lot of our B2B experimentation work is zero-party data. Let's take navigations and put them in the hero, so to speak, right? Like the principle of that. Typically, people product discover, solution discover through navigation, through filters, through search bars. Let's make that easier. Let's reduce and simplify the pages. Let's create the funnel to go into the screen rather than down, by asking questions, getting the head nod, a lot of that. So the zero-party data collection, describe yourself. What do you do? Is this why you're here? These really simple yes ladder type techniques. There's like sunk cost fallacy. There's a lot of behavioral psychology into that kind of stuff. A classic area, but the way that it's working in this new world of data privacy is that we can collect that zero-party data, pass it up to marketers doing what they can with retargeting, and then we can pass that data down for better lead scoring. And also personalization when people come back.
So I want to talk about that. Wait, I want to double click on that. I've been doing a lot of stuff on like personalization, like one-to-one marketing, and it's fascinating. I want to know what you think about experimentation in a world where we're going towards more and more personalization. And how do you do your measurements, given like each person gets their own treatment? of sorts.
Yeah. So how do you test the personalization? This is really hard, and truthfully, I've seen a lot of mistakes here, like way more mistakes than wins, like way more failures in implementation of these personalization tech stacks than the wins there. And when you do see success, like you and I both know a tool like incentivize, where you do see success in terms of like setting up a stack there, turning on a bunch of different variables for that machine to start to pivot on, and then having this holdout group, to measure from. That's cool, but you lose attribution, you sacrifice learning. So it can work, but it really is not satisfying for your testing.
It's a black box.
Yeah, it is, and it's not. Like, but in terms of after it runs for 6 months, you've thrown the kitchen sink, it turns into the black box. Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of big personalization campaigns, and sort of especially around like customer engagement mechanisms, pop-ups, the hero, the messaging, when drift comes up, when it doesn't, all of these types of things you can pivot on. But to measure on top of that, we're doing a lot of tests just on drift and on different pop-ups, like pivoting off of BounceX and analogs, or Wonderkin, or whatever it's called now. And seeing that there's no value. When you split test that, you net out with the same amount of MQLs or SQLs, what we're measuring in the tests, as you would otherwise. Yet marketers are still turning on these personalization campaigns because they're told to do so. So I don't think there's a lot of validation in the personalization methods, especially on B2B where the volumes are not there.
Yeah. Okay, I got a last one for you, which is kind of related to both the last two topics, which is in a world where we are doing more personalization, whether we should or not is irrelevant, right? We're just doing it. And we're doing at different stages of the funnel. How do you recommend creating an experience that makes sense when a user goes through, like, the acquisition on the paid ad, and then the landing page, and the product pages, and then the chat, and then the sign up, and maybe the emails, and those are siloed often in different teams, especially in larger companies, and each is running their own experimentation, and it feels like the customers just doing like ping pong between like different things. How do you help companies create this coherent experience, or did you just give up and just like, it is what it is, and customers are just seeing different things at different stages of the funnel?
Yeah, there's some terminology to hit on this first. One is like this idea of customer journey. You can say that, and a UX person will come to you and be like, "Oh, let me create a customer journey map," and it's what they really mean is like customer experience map, what people are feeling and perceiving as they're going through. You tell that customer journey to like a technical marketer or a data person, and they're going to think pipes, data piping, like where attribution is what their mind is going to go to. So those two things, those two ideas in principle are good to have artifacts on. Let's have a data map of where that ping ponging is happening, right? Let's have an ideal, a set of ideal flows, experiences, how people are feeling as they're going through. And then you just fall back on classic sort of customer intent buckets. As you go down through the funnel, at the top of the funnel is I want to know, or I want to do. As you go down the funnel is I want to buy, or I want to go, or something. Like the intent buckets change. And so the personalization then will trigger, generally, your heuristic is more transactional messaging, more transactional elements as you go down the funnel. And the big thing so this is tricky. There's some, you can make it simple by just bucketing your funnel, adding elements there, making it more transactional. Where we're seeing success is at the top of the funnel, making it extremely easy for the people that are looking for that transaction, talk to sales, that little verb, talk to sales, putting that in the header. Like skipping all of that roundabout, skipping the funnel. There is a portion of that people that will skip the funnel. And that's going to be your highest converting segment. That's going to be your highest converting funnel. That's going to be the one to do the incremental optimization on. Not only talk to sales and get a call back and all this crap, but no. Skip all the middlemen, make an appointment, talk to your best salespeople with that one. So
And that's where I've had my biggest wins on personalization, is actually running like forecasting models and have the CTA dynamically change from sign up to talk to sales for the visitors for whom we think that the value is there based on like IP detection or like the pages that they've seen or the acquisition that they've come through. And so like changing your CTA for like if you have like you're running like paid campaigns on the forecasted high-end ACV and high-end ACV keywords, like changing the CTA there is likely to work well. Absolutely.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Intent. It's all about intent. Like you can measure
Yeah.
intent, you got signals of intent.
Awesome.